everybody. You're here with Luminol on the Wall. I'm Becky. So today I was on the phone with my good old sister Bevy. She was just telling me how awesome motherhood is being to her and how her and her baby are settling into an awesome little routine. And from the sound of it, I think Bev is probably going to be coming back pretty shortly here. Now, I could be reading into things a little bit too much, and she's probably sitting there listening to this podcast being like, Becky, what the F? Why would you tell them anything like that? But I can hear it in her voice. It is only a matter of time before she is sitting across from me listening to, well, all the crazy stuff that we talk about. So with that being said, let's get into the case. Now, I'm going to warn you, this case may be a little unsatisfying to listen to for all you little true crime junkies out there. And the reason why is because I think this is the first case that we are covering where I'm not even sure if there was a crime committed. Now, this is not normally our MO. We tend to like the gruesome, gory details, but you're going to leave this kind of scratching your head and you're going to have to make up your own mind as to really what happened. So pay attention to the details, and for the love of God, let me know what you think about this case. So today we are heading to the other side of the world, to Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia. This is a city where tradition meets modern life in a whirlwind of culture, traffic, and energy. It is a vibrant melting pot of over 10 million people, rich with flavor, diversity, and a rhythm all on its own. Now, a woman named Mirna Salihin was born in 1988 to fairly wealthy parents in Jakarta, Indonesia. She had a twin sister named Sandy. And to be honest, I couldn't find too much about the family from their younger years. But what I do know is that Mirna eventually went to Billy Blue College of Design in Sydney, Australia. And while in school, she became close with a couple friends who also were from Indonesia, one of them being a girl named Jessica Wongso. The two bonded quickly over their shared roots in Jakarta. Now, after graduating, Mirna moved back to Jakarta with her boyfriend, Arif Samarko, while Jessica stayed behind in Australia. And although the two women remained friends, they did drift apart, only seeing each other sporadically. Now, by 2015, they were both off doing their own thing. Mirna was living the dream. She was a wealthy socialite, she was hardworking, successful, and by late 2015 was planning her dream wedding to her long-term boyfriend, Arif. Now, Jessica was still in Australia. She was working with the New South Wales Ambulance Department as a graphic designer and was also in a relationship. Now, closer to the end of 2015, Jessica's mental health was kind of on the decline. So for the holidays, she decided that she was going to head on over to Jakarta, kind of reset, refresh. While in Jakarta, Jessica reconnected with Mirna and another mutual friend named Hani. The three of them had made plans to meet up on the evening of January 6, 2016 at Cafe Olivier in the Grand Indonesia shopping mall. Now, this cafe was fairly prestigious, and it was absolutely beautiful. It has plants everywhere, so much natural light. It was just really nice, and it was known for its elite clientele and strict dress code. Now, on January 6th, around 3:30 p.m., Jessica was seen on CCTV camera arriving at the cafe. But she left 2 minutes later. She was extremely early, so she decided to go and do some shopping while she waited. Around 4:14, Jessica returned to the cafe with shopping bags in hand, and at 4:18, she had sat down and ordered some drinks before the others arrived. She had ordered a Vietnamese iced coffee for Mirna, who was known to be completely obsessed with coffee. And apparently, this Cafe Olivier had Vietnamese iced coffees to die for. And then Jessica also ordered 2 cocktails, an old-fashioned and a Sazerac. By 4:24 p.m., the drinks were served. Now, I think they were ordered a little prematurely myself, because the ladies weren't even set to arrive for another half an hour, and then on top of it, they were an additional 16 minutes late. and they didn't end up sitting down until 5:18 p.m. that day. And almost immediately, Mirna took a sip of her iced coffee, and on CCTV camera, she was seen waving her hands near her mouth, and she told Hani it tasted strange and pushed it over to her and was like, smell it. And within a couple minutes, you can see on the CCTV camera that Mirna's head kind of cocks back in her seat. She starts struggling to breathe. Her friends report that she started foaming at the mouth and then began to convulse. You can begin to see the panic on Mirna's friends. Hani visibly is panicked. She's calling out to Mirna, trying to wake her up, kind of shake her. And when this happens, the staff from the cafe rush over to help. And they collectively pick up Mirna and move her to the ground. And they are all kind of under the assumption that she's having an epileptic attack. Now, from a different angle, the CCTV footage shows Hani is like full distress mode and is doing everything she possibly could to help her friend. She then calls Mirna's brand new husband, Arif, and she tells him what's going on. Now, because everyone thought that Mirna was just having a seizure, they assumed that it would calm down, but it was rapidly getting worse. And during this time, the staff from the cafe began to notice something kind of odd. Jessica wasn't helping. She wasn't really doing anything other than standing there and just watching this chaos unfold. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Jessica turned to the manager and asked, "What did you put in her drink?" Now, that comment raised some eyebrows. No one had even considered the possibility that something might have been wrong with the drink at that point. They assumed it was just a medical episode. So the manager continued talking to Jessica and got a really weird vibe from her because she was oddly defensive for seemingly no reason. And this whole interaction with Jessica just didn't sit right with the manager. So she decided to take the iced coffee from the table to the back of the cafe and check it out. When she smelled it, she said it reeked kind of like glue and something rotten. And when she brought it to the bartender who had made it, he noticed the color of the coffee looked kind of off. It was far more yellow than normal, and he described it as looking like turmeric. And he also noticed that it smelled weird. Now, the two employees kind of panicked because their initial thought was, had they accidentally poisoned one of their customers? So the bartender quickly double-checked all the ingredients that had gone into the coffee, and individually, each of them looked and tasted perfectly normal. So nothing really added up. By this point, Mirna was in pretty rough shape. She was taken out in a wheelchair and rushed to the hospital.
Hello, my name is Kristen Riguidel, and I'm a licensed insurance broker across Canada and in the United States. But I want to ask you a question. Is life super predictable? No, there's always going to be curveballs in life, but there's two things that I can guarantee you. One, we're all going to have to pay taxes, and two, we're all going to die. I know, it's morbid, right? But it's true. And that's where life insurance comes in. Life insurance is a selfless act. At the end of the day, it's meant for your loved ones in the event you were to pass away unexpectedly. And not that money can ever replace us, but I always liked the idea of leaving some money behind for my brothers, whether that be for their college education, or a down payment on a house, or even just time off of work to grieve. Because the last thing I would want for my family is to have to go to work and pay the bills while they're grieving. And so life insurance gives you the peace of mind that no matter when you pass away, your loved ones are taken care of. With flexible plans, affordable premiums, and coverage that fits your unique needs, I do the shopping around for you so that you can get the protection without the hassle, because taking care of your future doesn't have to be complicated. If you'd like to discuss options, you can send me an email at krigidel15lrxc@wfgmail.ca or give me a phone call at 403-785-5300. 7670 to learn more and get a free quote today, so you can live tomorrow with peace of mind.
Her friends and family arrived not too long after, only to be met with the devastating news that Mirna was pronounced dead. Everyone was in complete shock. How could this have happened? Mirna was young. She was seemingly healthy, and she'd only just sat down a couple minutes before, where she seemed quite normal. So at the hospital, Mirna's father was so confused, and he was desperate for answers. He started questioning Hani and Jessica, and when he learned about the suspicion around the iced coffee, he himself asked Jessica and Hani what they had to drink. Now, Jessica told him that she only had mineral water, but that wasn't true. And although this was a pretty small lie, Mr. Eddie, Mirna's father, felt something was off. Jessica's behavior just wasn't sitting right with him. And at one point, he recalled overhearing Jessica ask questions like, did Mirna die? Did she die? Mr. Eddie also claimed that he heard Jessica say, was I the one who killed Mirna? Now, like I mentioned at the very beginning, there's a lot of controversy in this case, and to this day, you don't really know what actually happened. So take what Mr. Eddie said with a grain of salt, but in interviews, he claimed that is what he heard. So 3 days later, on January 9th, after Mirna's family had left the hospital, they were headed towards the funeral home to begin their painful planning. However, the police arrived around the same time and told them that they suspected that Mirna had been poisoned and needed to do an autopsy. Now, initially, Mirna's mother, Santi, said, don't let them touch Mirna's body, but the police explained to the family that if Mirna was poisoned, then they needed an autopsy to help the case. And eventually, the family agreed, and they took Mirna's body away, back to the hospital. The following day, on January 10th, Mirna's family had arranged her funeral, and that same morning, the police called Mirna's father to let him and the family know that Mirna had died from cyanide poisoning. She had traces of cyanide in her stomach, and after testing, it appeared that her coffee had been spiked with a large amount of cyanide. At that time, Mr. Eddie was also informed that they already had a suspect. Now, this case almost immediately blew up across Indonesia and most of Asia. Due to its notoriety, it's not every day that a wealthy socialite is murdered, especially with cyanide. Now, typically in the past, cyanide was used as a form of chemical warfare. Soldiers were also given cyanide pills and instructed to take them if they thought they were going to be captured by the enemy. What made this case specifically stand out was that cyanide is not commonly used in murder because it's fairly easy to find in the body and the symptoms are pretty obvious, even compared to something like antifreeze. It's also hard to get your hands on as an average Joe. Now, just so everyone knows how cyanide works and why it's so deadly, is it prevents the cells in our body from receiving oxygen. Virtually, the cells asphyxiate. Now, that's a super basic explanation, but obviously our bodies need oxygen to live, and so this has an effect on our whole body. Ultimately, our bodies will go into convulsions, our skin will turn cherry red, and organs will fail. And in high doses, it causes death in minutes. Due to its dangerous properties, it's on the list of the top 10 most poisonous substances on Earth. So given the circumstances, this investigation moved rather quickly. The police had gone to the cafe, they ran through the CCTV footage, and they spoke with the staff and witnesses. And after everything, they came up with their suspect. It was Jessica Wongso, the same suspect as Mr. Eddie himself. What made the police suspect Jessica initially was the three women had planned to meet at 5 p.m. that evening, but based on the security footage from the cafe, police knew that Jessica was extremely early, like an hour and a half early. So we know she went and did a bunch of shopping, and then she returned to the cafe with shopping bags in hand and was seated at the booth. At 4:18, she orders the drinks for herself and her friends, which, as I said, was a little premature. It was still 40 minutes before anyone was set to arrive. After she ordered, she got up and was seen walking around the cafe, and we're not really sure what she was doing, but it seemed like she was looking around, scouting the place out. And on several occasions, she seemed to make direct eye contact with the security cameras. And then she went and sat down. Now, the one thing I do want to point out about this cafe is that it is high end. There are a lot of rich people that hang out there. There are local celebrities that hang out. So, was Jessica maybe seeing if she could see any celebrities or people she knew? Or was she scouting out the cameras like they thought? Either way, she went back and sat down. Then a couple minutes later, at 4:24, the drinks were brought to the table. Now, from another security camera angle, she was seen positioning the shopping bags in front of the drinks, blocking them from the camera's view. Investigators found it odd that Jessica would have placed her shopping bags on the table in the first place, because why not on the booth bench? And, I will agree with them. The bench, probably where I would leave them myself, not on the table. But everyone's a little different, and, maybe that was just her normal place to put stuff down. I don't know. So after they go through all the footage, they speak to the bartender and the manager, and it was determined that all the ingredients that had been used in the iced coffee seemed normal and not contaminated. And because of that, investigators felt that they could narrow down the timeline when the drink was spiked. And that must have been sometime from when the drinks were brought to the table, but before Mirna and Hani arrived at the cafe. This meant that only Jessica would have had that opportunity to put cyanide in the coffee. And because she hid the coffee behind her bags, that's when she must have done it. Now, this was nothing but a theory because there was not a single camera angle where you could confirm that's what happened. But either way, by January 30th, 2016, the police felt that they had enough evidence supporting Jessica Wong-So's guilt. The police made their way to the hotel that Jessica had been staying at while in Jakarta and arrested her for the premeditated murder of Mirna Salihin. In the hotel room, they noticed Jessica had all her belongings packed as if she was about to leave. Now, one can only assume that she was getting ready to head back to Australia, where she lived and where her family lived. Now, the media caught wind that Jessica was arrested, and they were already at the police station when they arrived. Jessica maintained her innocence, but it seemed like she really enjoyed the spotlight. She was smiling and laughing for the cameras, and she didn't really seem to grasp the seriousness of the situation. So when people saw that on the news, it came across as really arrogant and evil. And going into her trial, most people already thought that she was guilty. Now, this trial was an absolute media sensation. The trial was covered 24 hours a day on 14 different TV stations across Indonesia. The courtroom and the streets were filled with people, and because of how chaotic and sensationalized this case was, it was highly compared to the OJ trial. Now, after Jessica was arrested, her family hired one of Indonesia's top-tier defense lawyers named Otto Hasibuan. Not long after, the preliminary trial began in June of 2016. Now, the Indonesian courts are a little different compared to North America, and the biggest difference is that there are no juries. Each case has a prosecution and a defense. They both argue their sides to 3 judges who will determine if the defendant is guilty or not. And they will also dictate the sentencing. Now, this trial was long. It went on and on for almost 6 months in total. In a trial this long, you would probably expect to see a really solid lineup of physical and circumstantial evidence, but this case was purely circumstantial. And hearing the details, it really failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Jessica was guilty of this crime. Now, one of the biggest missteps of this case, and I think one of the biggest problems in this case, was when Dr. Slimette, who was in charge of the autopsy, testified that Mirna had gastric injuries in her stomach due to corrosive material. They had done a toxicology screening test which confirmed that she had cyanide in her stomach. But when Jessica's lawyer asked if he had done an autopsy, he said no. There was no autopsy performed. And the doctor was asked why not. And his explanation was that the police had told him not to do it. However, in the case file, there was a letter from the police requesting an autopsy. And the question is, did he just fail to do his job? Or had the police told him not to? Now, you can imagine this is a huge problem because there is no way to rule out any other cause of death. And this may have provided some insight because Mirna's first toxicology test, which had only been done 70 minutes after she died, had no cyanide in her system. The following sample that was done 3 days later, they found 0.2 milligrams in her system. A lethal dose of cyanide would have been anywhere from 50 to 176 milligrams. So to put those results in perspective, a single apple seed has 0.6 milligrams of cyanide. So one single apple seed has more cyanide in it than was found in Mirna's system. Now, to cover all our bases, cyanide stays in the body for a while. In some circumstances, it has been detected in a decomposed body around the year mark. So for her test to show non-lethal levels, even after 3 days, is unreal. Now, when this was brought up to Dr. Slimette, he defended his report. What's even more interesting is when the iced coffee had been examined and the toxicology screening had been done on that, it tested positive with extremely high levels of cyanide. So, if Mirna had drinking a contaminated iced coffee, she would have had much higher levels in her system, but she didn't. Now, the defense brought in a forensic pathologist who explained that typically people who have died from cyanide poisoning have faces that are usually a distinct cherry red color. But Mirna's was a shade of blue. And this would indicate that something else was going on in her body. Mix that information with low levels of cyanide, an autopsy should have been performed to figure out the cause of death because it didn't initially seem like cyanide. The pathologist also found it odd that the concentration of cyanide in the glass with the iced coffee was so concentrated. He had explained to the court that the levels they found in the glass were so high that it could have evaporated into the air and affected the nearby people or the staff that had smelled the beverage. But no one else reported anything. So again, how did the coffee have such high levels, but Mirna had such low amounts in her system? Now, to add a bit more drama to this court case, after the forensic pathologist had testified about Mirna having a blue color to her face, a photo of Mirna began circulating in the media. It showed a photo of her post-mortem with a cherry red face. Now, this photo had originally been taken only 2 hours after her death by this forensic pathologist, and her face was a blue color. Now, Mirna's father was going around showing this new altered picture to the media and had brought it to court. He put it on the judge's desk as well as the prosecutor's desk to prove his daughter died of cyanide poisoning. Fortunately, the judge said that this wasn't legitimate evidence and threw it out. Now, after this incident, Mr. Eddy was very angry. So angry, in fact, that he ended up bringing a gun to the courtroom, and the defense believed that he brought it as pure intimidation. And it really makes me wonder, though, why is Mr. Eddy so determined to prove his daughter died by cyanide instead of letting the evidence speak? Like, is he just wanting someone to be blamed for her death? I really just don't get it. So in this case, the prosecution really leaned on the timeline to prove that Jessica had planned this murder. They said earlier in the day at 1:04 p.m., hours before meeting up, Jessica texted the girls saying she wanted to buy them drinks and had asked what they wanted. Now, they responded and said they would just order when they got there, but Jessica insisted. They explained that after Jessica arrived at the cafe, she ordered drinks with enough time to add the cyanide to Mirna's coffee and use the shopping bags to hide what she had done. So at this point, I don't know about you guys, but my big question here is, why would Jessica want Mirna dead? You know, they were estranged friends. How much beef can they possibly have? So according to Mirna's husband, he had told investigators that quite some time before, Mirna had gone to Australia and ended up meeting up with Jessica. And they got to talking, and at one point, very bluntly, Mirna asks Jessica if she was stupid for staying with this guy who treated her like crap. And apparently Jessica didn't take too kindly to how Mirna was speaking with her, and she ended up leaving the restaurant. So the prosecution argued that Jessica was angry with Mirna, and on top of that, she had always been jealous because Mirna's life was always so perfect. And that when she had seen Mirna had gotten married in early December and not invited her to the wedding, she went off the deep end and set out a plan to kill Mirna. Now, I know that jealousy is a big reason for a lot of people to kill someone, but I personally find this motive a little out there. And the reason why that is because Mirna and Jessica were not close friends at that point, and they hadn't been for the last couple years. They lived in 2 different countries, and they really didn't have anything to do with each other day to day. And I'm not saying that this motive is completely impossible. Just given the circumstances, it just seems a little far-fetched to me. But then you start to hear more about Jessica's past in Australia. The months leading up to Mirna's death, Jessica's mental state was not the greatest. She had been hospitalized 5 times for attempted suicide and suicide risk. She was drinking lots. She had crashed her car into a seniors living facility where she had gotten fairly injured because of it. Fortunately, all the seniors were safe, and it was more her who got damaged. During that same time period, Jessica's boss, Christy Carter, was basically watching Jessica's life unravel. Her behavior was more erratic and dangerous. It seemed like she had 2 very distinct sides to her. Based on her attitude, the hatred she seemed to have, and a general craziness, Christy thought that Jessica had 2 completely split personalities. On top of that, Christy had been on the receiving end of Jessica's poor behavior. She had received death threats from Jessica stating in an email, "You have to die and your mom should too." And one time while Christy went to see Jessica in the hospital, Jessica had told Christy she wanted to go home. And she wanted to because the staff there were treating her like she had just killed someone. She then said if she wanted to kill someone, she'd know the exact right dose. During that time frame, things kind of got weird between Jessica and her Australian boyfriend. You know, she was kind of starting to scare him, and because of that, he had taken out a restraining order against her. He stated that he was very fearful of her and what she might do to him or herself. On top of that, 2 days after Jessica learned about Mirna's wedding, she was fired from the New South Wales ambulance service. And so you can imagine what state she's in at that moment in time. And hearing all that, it did seem a bit more plausible that Jessica may have snapped after seeing Mirna had gotten married. But at the same time, this was just a theory, and there was no evidence to support that Jessica had snapped or had any ill intention while in Jakarta. So after bringing to light Jessica's previous struggles, the prosecution brought in an expert in empirical studies who claimed Jessica was a bad person and that she was also a psycho-narcissist with a split personality. This expert claimed he had become an expert by watching and studying facial expressions and features from American films. Now, because of her history, everyone just ate this up, and even though there's no scientific validity behind this, this madness had gone on for months, and despite there being no hard evidence supporting Jessica Wongso's guilt, she ended up being found guilty of premeditated murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. After sentencing, Jessica spoke directly to the judges. She said that she did not accept the verdict, or the sentence for that matter. It seemed completely biased, and the evidence was poor. Her lawyer completely agreed. He believed Jessica was framed or blamed for a crime she did not commit, and every time he brought new evidence forward, he was cut off and wasn't allowed to mention it in the trial. Which is bullcrap, let's be real. And besides murder and really horrible things like that, there is nothing worse than someone having to go to jail for a crime they did not commit. And to not allow evidence to prove someone's innocence in court is just wrong. Now, after everything that was mentioned in this trial, I personally am left with a couple questions, and big questions, that I would need answered before I could find anyone guilty. Number 1, where did Jessica get the cyanide from? What was the real cause of death? And how was Jessica's mental health at the time of the crime and during the trial? Because no real psychoevaluation was ever done to determine what her mental state was at any moment. Now, on top of the questions I have and all the ridiculous testimony from apparent non-experts, there was also some really shady things that went on behind the scene. Now, apparently there was footage of the police entering and exiting the cafe that had been permanently deleted. Some of the first things I thought when I heard that was about the high level of cyanide in the coffee. Had it been planted there? Because it wasn't inside Mirna's body, that's for darn sure. Then, before the trial had started, the manager who had smelt the coffee and the bartender who had made the iced coffee both had met with Mr. Eddie, Mirna's father, before the trial. When they were asked in a Netflix documentary why they had met with Mr. Eddie, the bartender said, "It was so long ago, I don't remember." He then said, "I guess we had met about the case, about telling the truth, being consistent, and not to be afraid." Then the manager said she was afraid to say the wrong thing. So if they were just reporting what they had saw or seen that day and their experience, why would they need to talk or be reminded about telling the truth and keep it consistent? I don't understand that. Other than maybe someone's lying or fibbing a story, trying to frame Jessica. I don't know. Those are the options. There are also some shady things about Jessica. And one of them was the day Mirna was pronounced dead, Jessica had sent Sandy, Mirna's twin, an article about a case where someone was poisoned by cyanide in their coffee. She had also called and asked Sandy what the lab test results were. Now the question is, was Jessica a concerned friend and wanting to help the case? Or, was she taunting Sandy? Who knows? After Mirna died, Jessica was acting weird and was not immediately questioned or searched, which is a failure on the police, let's be real. She wasn't searched or questioned until 3 days later. She did not have any cyanide on her. The clothes she had been wearing that day, she had asked her housekeeper to get rid of them and burn them, and they were never found. In her most recent interview, Jessica said that she was fat at the time and her pants or her clothes had ripped, so she had no use for them any longer, and that's why she asked the housekeeper to get rid of them. Either that's brutally honest, or you're hiding something, but they'll never know. So a couple years ago, Netflix came out with a documentary called Ice Cold: Murder, Coffee, and Jessica Wongso. I've watched it several times, and I think this series was a very biased film. To be honest, it seemed to focus a lot on Mirna's father and what he deemed to be the facts. What's interesting is that some of the people that have spoken about this case on the documentary, who had come at it from a purely educational purpose and had no relation to the case or investigation, noticed huge discrepancies in how the police investigated this case and how the justice system was able to find a woman guilty of murder without a single piece of hard evidence. Some of these people had reported being given bags of money to stop talking. One thing to keep in mind is that Mirna's father, Mr. Eddie, was a very wealthy man. And earlier in the podcast, I had mentioned that it almost seemed like he was forcing this narrative that his daughter had died by cyanide poisoning and trying to blame Jessica for it. Now, I feel like this is almost in line where like people are being like bribed to stop talking about anything that contradicts Mr. Eddie's narrative. Now, maybe I'm being cynical. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking too much into it, but like, does it not seem weird? Anyways, let me move on before I really go into a deep conspiracy here. So eventually, Jessica used all her appeals and was denied. But in kind of a surprising turn, in August of 2024, Jessica Wongso was released after only 8 years in prison for good behavior. Which, if you're a murderer, like, that doesn't happen. But also, I'm not from Indonesia, so maybe things are different. I don't know. She will be on parole until 2032. Her case is currently under judicial review. And what that means is that it is a legal process in which a court re-examines a final decision in a case, typically after all your appeals have been exhausted, and it's only ever granted under specific conditions such as the discovery of new evidence, legal error, or a miscarriage of justice. Now, many people believe that this was brought to light because of the Netflix documentary, and because they shone light on how poorly the investigation and trial were conducted. So, if she really didn't do anything, then good for her. I'm glad this is happening, and thank God for Netflix. Now, since being released, Jessica is super focused on clearing her name and finding a way to make money. And since it would be nearly impossible to find a traditional job, given the uncertainty of this crime, she's trying to use her notoriety to get book and movie deals, become an influencer. There are reports in her most recent interview that she has been contacted by major coffee, beauty, food, and tech brands for collaborations. Now, just 3 days ago, on May 18th, Jessica Wongso's first ever interview with 7 News Spotlight was released, and it did not disappoint. Many hard questions were asked, like, why did Jessica show up so early to the cafe? Why did she put her shopping bags on the table? Why was she smiling and laughing in public after Mirna had died? And could she explain her behavior in Australia? And was she jealous of Mirna's life? Now, I won't spoil it for you because it is really interesting. And I will put the link in the show notes. But what I'm going to say is I got a really uneasy feeling about Jessica Wongso in that interview. And still, with her answers, I have no idea if Jessica is a calculated killer or if Mirna died of underlying health conditions. What I do know is that there is not enough evidence to support a guilty verdict. And the investigation was not done well, and because of that, there are questions that will probably never get answered. So, go watch that interview, see what you come up with, how do you feel, and let me know if you hear something or notice something that I didn't. I would love to know. So, with that being said, no questions are really answered. Was there a crime? Was there not? I don't know. So, I'll leave you with that. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
And just your weekly reminder to download our weekly episodes, follow us on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, and give us a follow on our social medias. You can find us at Luminol on the Wall. Can't wait till next week.